I had an uncle called Sanders. It was actually Alexander, but it was called Sanders by all his mates and that. Sanders was a painter, a very good painter. He worked with the Cooperative in Glasgow, which really was a very, very big painting contractor. So not only did they sell, food and such like, but they had very many businesses as well, builders and such like. Anyway, I loved my Uncle Sanders. He used to tell me sort of great stories, and I would say to him, this is when I visited my granny, and he was still living with her, and he would be getting himself all toshed up, ready to go out to the dancing. So I'd say to him, "Where are you going, Uncle Sanders?" "Going to the dancing, son. Going to listen to the big band and all that." Now, at that time, a very popular tune was Alexander's Ragtime Band. And I associated Alexander's Ragtime Band with a cowboy band. And I would say to him, "Is Alexander a cowboy?" "Oh, he's a cowboy, yes, he's got the guns and the so on that, and he plays cowboy music when we're dancing." So that was fine. I used to think it'd be marvellous to go and see Alexander's Ragtime Band. But it really was just an ordinary dance band. Eventually, war came along. I was by this time about 9, and I still liked to hear Alexander's Ragtime Band on the radio, but I'd less time to see Uncle Sanders at that time. So, excuse me, time went by and he was called up for the army. Now, Sanders always had problems, a nasal problem, and always having to use drops because his nose was getting blocked up and he's hearing very badly and so on. So when he went into the army, we really didn't think the army would take him, for he could hardly really hear anything. He was always, what? This was his attempt to, in fact, get you to repeat whatever was to be said. So away he went. He was put into the Royal Artillery, which was the guys that fired the heavy guns, the big guns, the cannons and such like. And when it came to D-Day, that was the day where we, in fact, attacked France in an effort to drive out the Germans. He was eventually shipped over with the armaments that they were going to use, and very quickly engaged in firing upon the enemy with these massive guns. On one occasion, he was on a barrage firing for 24 hours, night and day. And you can imagine the fatigue that these men had, and the sound, the noise and that. A lot of them had, if they had them, earphones to deafen the sound. But that restricted, in fact, officers being able to shout orders to them and so on. Anyway, they've been banging away with this gun, probably carrying very large shells, loading, turning round, picking up another one, and there would be a stream of men feeding this gun with massive shells. Now, the thing to think about is, while they were shelling the enemy, there were civilians on that side too. These were the prisoners had been part of the country of France that had been occupied by Germans. Now, I'm quite sure some of them would be killed in that. I've no idea how the fire was directed. Was it an attempt just purely to shoot where the Germans' facilities were, or was it a case of knocking down buildings so they couldn't shelter in them, taking out farmhouses and getting rid of haystacks in case there was something hidden in there? Eventually, after good all night and day barrage, he, in fact, were told to stand down. and they very quickly, the whole lot of them, headed for anywhere they could get their head down, get a mug of tea or whatever it was, and lie down. Sanders immediately climbed up on the sandbags were around the gun emplacement and lay down and very quickly fell asleep. The gun nozzle was just above his head, far enough up not to hit it, but at the same time it was there. Now, because of his deafness, he had trouble knowing that he had been called into action again, along with his mates. And it only came to the alert this had happened when the gun went off above his head. Now, the description he gave was, he says, "I think I rose off the ground horizontally. My head was about 10 times the size it was. I didn't know if it was still in position, and then I landed back down on the sandbags." He says, what a shock that was. Now, I can assure you that when he did come back from the invasion forces at the end of the war, he was more deaf than ever he had been. But on top of that, he'd brought back a belt, had a buckle on it, and it said, "God mit us," with the swastika, German swastika, or eagle, I can't mind which. The right-hand side of the belt was badly worn, as if there'd been a holster sliding back and forward along that particular belt. Now, I don't know what happened to it. For a long time, we played with it as children. And gradually, when you're familiar with a thing, you get careless with it. But it was a genuine article, and I've since seen people trying to buy copies of them on auction markets. The other thing that he brought back were hundreds of handkerchiefs. Now, all I can say is these handkerchiefs were taken from prisoners of war. I think it was a punishment so they couldn't blow their nose. But the thing was, they were very welcome in this country, because over the wartime years, things like that became difficult to get or replace. So Granny Moffat washed them in the gas boiler, put them through the wringer, tidied them all up and ironed them all, and then divided them amongst all the members of the family. Now, I couldn't identify any of them now where they are, if they're still around, but that was our spoil from the British invasion against the Germans in 1944. Bye. I hope you've enjoyed that. Bye just now.